Okay, today is the 3rd of August. Senator John Ossoff hits back after his opponent Mike Collins ducked out of his own press conference. Then I break it down.
Okay, I want to touch on what we saw this morning in Georgia. We saw this morning the sad spectacle of a crumbling man in Congressman Mike Collins, refusing to answer basic questions about his ties to white nationalism and neo-Nazi ideology, and his candidacy and campaign in crisis as a result. We saw a candidate for the United States Senate, a sitting member of Congress, Mike Collins, run away from a press conference because he was asked some important and straightforward questions. And Congressman Collins is not going to get away with refusing to answer these questions. Congressman Collins needs to come out this afternoon and answer. Does he apologize for his office's documented links to some of the nation's most notorious white supremacists? And will he release every email, every text message, every signal message, and every other communication between his office and his staff and these notorious white supremacists? Let's just review what we've learned about Mike Collins in recent weeks. We learned that the congressman's office was briefing some of the most notorious white supremacists in America, Nick Fuentes and Richard Spencer, who helped organize the Unite the Right hate rally in Charlottesville. His office, Mike Collins' office, was briefing these white supremacists on its efforts on behalf of a Holocaust denier. We've also learned through CNN's reporting that it appears Mike Collins' business hired a neo-Nazi to produce promotional materials, but the congressman still 2 weeks later refuses to answer whether he or his businesses paid this neo-Nazi. And today, facing these questions from the press corps in Georgia, Congressman Mike Collins ran away. He is refusing to answer questions, and Georgians have a right to know the answers to these questions. He is seeking a 6-year term in the United States Senate. He needs to release all of his office's communications with these white supremacists. He needs to apologize for his ties to white nationalism and neo-Nazi ideology. And he needs to say whether he or his businesses have paid this neo-Nazi. Your questions, please.
Senator, he also said, Mike Collins, he said John Ossoff refuses to disavow these Democrat socialist movements in our country. We have seen in polling, including ours today, that a third of Democrats now identify themselves as democratic socialists. I'm wondering, does that concern you, and would you disavow democratic socialism?
I'm not looking at polling, Manu. What concerns me is that we have a sitting member of the U.S. House of Representatives whose office was directly briefing some of America's most notorious white supremacists about its efforts on behalf of a Holocaust denier, and a sitting member of Congress whose business apparently hired a neo-Nazi and who refuses to answer whether he or his businesses have paid this neo-Nazi. This is not about the sort of daily partisan politics or public opinion polling. This is a sitting member of Congress running away from answering those questions.
But you've seen socialism, you've seen these socialist candidates do well in a lot of primaries. This is not just one poll, it's a trend. Does that trend of the Democratic Socialists or rise, does that concern you?
You know, I stand on my voting record, my statements, my views, and my positions, and Congressman Mike Collins should explain his record, which includes an office that has been communicating directly with some of America's most notorious white supremacists about its efforts on behalf of a Holocaust denier. And according to your network's reporting, a business that Mike Collins owns that has hired a neo-Nazi to produce its content. He needs to answer these questions today, and what you saw today in Georgia is that when faced with these questions, he ran away.
How do you think this race is going to go? Do you think you're on a glide path to victory, or could it tighten up?
Oh, I take nothing for granted. I run every day like I'm behind. But right now, the central question in this race is, will Mike Collins answer these questions? Again, it's been 2 weeks since that CNN report. He won't say whether his business has paid the neo-Nazi. It's been weeks since we saw documentation of his office's ties to some of the nation's most notorious white supremacists. Let me just restate what the congressman needs to do. He needs to produce every single email, text message, phone record, and other communication between his office, his staff, and these notorious white supremacists. He needs to apologize for his and his office's extensive documented links to white nationalism and neo-Nazi ideology, and he needs to answer whether he or his businesses have paid this neo-Nazi. Anyone else?
So, to Manu's point, though, how are you navigating this? There's a growing anti-Israel sentiment within some factions of your party. I mean, is that a part of an electorate that you are seeking to get, or do you need to disavow those views? Do you disavow those views?
I don't base my views on foreign policy and national security on public opinion or political considerations. And I stand by my voting record and my public statements on foreign policy issues. The question that Georgians need answers to is, has a sitting member of Congress who represents Georgia in the U.S. House of Representatives been paying a neo-Nazi? Will he release every communication between his office and some of the nation's most notorious white supremacists? And will he apologize for his widely documented ties to white nationalist and neo-Nazi ideology? These are not allegations. These are confirmed reports. And again, what you saw this morning, and you should all play the tape, is a congressman crumbling under the pressure of being asked to answer these fundamental questions, and Georgians have a right to know.
Senator, you say you stand firm on your voting record as to prove what you believe, but this does come at a point in the party where we see Democrats who are moved very far to the left having anti-Israel sentiment, or even in the case of someone like Mamdani calling for Netanyahu to be arrested. So could you take the time now to reiterate and clarify what your stance is on Israel?
Well, I'm not aware of any sitting Democratic member of Congress who has documented ties to the most notorious white supremacists in the country. I'm not aware of any sitting Democratic member of Congress who refuses to answer whether they or their business has been paying a neo-Nazi to produce content for it. Those are the questions that Georgians need answers to today. As for my record on foreign policy issues and national security issues, it's well documented. I've made extensive statements on the floor of the Senate about these complex national security issues, and I'd encourage you to take a look at it. Thank you all so very much. I appreciate you guys. Thank you. Thank you, guys. Take care.
Friday, former Vice President Kamala Harris speaks at the National Urban League's Legacy Leadership Awards luncheon, an event honoring individuals for their contribution.
On July 30th, 2026, Senator John Ossoff of Georgia held a press conference on Capitol Hill and put one demand in front of his 2026 Republican opponent, Representative Mike Collins: apologize immediately. The reason: 2 weeks of documented ties between Collins, his family, and the white nationalist social media career of David Allen Scheer II, married to Collins's daughter and living on Collins's own property in Georgia. Ossoff's post to X on the day of the press conference was direct. Only a known bigot and anti-Semite like Mike Collins would enable the ongoing spread of neo-Nazi propaganda. Collins must apologize immediately for his disqualifying ties to neo-Nazi ideology and notorious white supremacists. That is not a slip. That is not a heated tweet. That is a sitting United States senator making a written record. CNN's investigative team broke the story on July 16, 2026. Scheer, Collins' son-in-law, has built a personal social media audience of more than 1.5 million followers across 4 platforms. His content is not fringe or obscure. It is professionally produced, it reaches millions, and its central themes are white nationalism, anti-Semitism, Holocaust minimization, and calls to remove Muslims from the United States. Aaron Rupar clipped the walk-off inside the hour. Collins abruptly wrapped up a press conference instead of answering questions about his close ties with a prominent neo-Nazi propagandist. The clip traveled fast because the visual was unmistakable. A sitting congressman running for United States Senate standing at his own event, walking away rather than say one sentence about his own son-in-law. Ossoff tied the story to Collins's record in Congress. Collins voted for the largest Medicaid cut in modern history. Collins voted to double health insurance premiums for more than 1 million Georgians. That is a policy record voters can measure. And on top of that record sits a personal question Collins has spent 2 weeks refusing to answer. That combination, Ossoff argued, is why voters should reject him. Rupar's follow-up focused on the physical and financial proximity. Scheer participated in Collins' campaign. He appears in family photos on the campaign site. He attended the primary victory party. He is registered to vote at a Collins-owned home next to the congressman's own residence. This is not a distant relative. This is somebody sharing an address and a family and a campaign operation. This is the verbatim of the walk-off from Collins' own microphone. We've fully addressed that. Listen, thank you. I appreciate y'all's time. I appreciate you coming out this morning. That is the entire response. There was no answer to the reporter's question. There was no comment on his son-in-law. There was thank you, and then the microphone was gone. The Ossoff campaign statement was 2 sentences. He ran away under the press's scrutiny. He is refusing to answer questions, and Georgians have a right to know the answers to these questions. That final phrase is the point of the whole press conference. This is not a partisan attack. This is a candidate for federal office declining to respond to reporting about his own household. Talking points. Memo documented what happened elsewhere in the party. Nothing. The Georgia Republican Party did not respond. State GOP leadership did not respond. The National Republican Senatorial Committee, the arm of the party responsible for Senate races, did not respond. The story had been on CNN for 2 weeks by the time Ossoff held his press conference. In 2 weeks, Collins' own party had said not one public word. Georgia State Representative Esther Panich, the state legislature's only Jewish member, put the sharpest sentence on record. Being pro-Israel is not a hall pass for anti-Semitism. It is not a shield you hide behind when the hatred is in your own family, on your own property, with your own name attached. That is the exact ground Collins tried to defend himself on. And a member of his state's legislature said publicly, it is not defense enough. Ossoff told Georgia Public Broadcasting the next day, on July 31st, 2 weeks after the CNN report. The congressman still refuses to answer whether he or his businesses paid this neo-Nazi. The financial question is not rhetorical. Scheer's trucking company reportedly produced promotional content for Collins' family trucking business. If money changed hands in either direction, that is a factual disclosure a Senate candidate owes his voters. The Democratic Party of Georgia posted its statement on the day of the CNN report. Collins is funding and enabling a white nationalist who films neo-Nazi propaganda. Collins should explain himself and apologize to Georgians immediately. This was July 16th. The apology has not come. The explanation has not come. And 2 weeks later, Collins walked off a stage rather than provide either. This is the exact question Collins declined to answer. Media ID transcribed it. Reporting came out about your son-in-law posting white nationalist and anti-Semitic content. Do you want to comment on some of the things he said in those videos? A yes or a no or a single sentence would have been an answer. Collins gave none of the 3. He gave thank you, and then he left. The Ossoff campaign compiled the pattern, socializing with a known Nazi, speaking in anti-Semitic dog whistles, targeting a Jewish reporter and then doubling down, and now enabling a white nationalist social media career inside his own family. Mike Collins' record of bigotry and anti-Semitism speaks for itself. That is the through line the campaign is running on for the next 15 months. Collins' only response was through a written spokesperson statement. Mike Collins has always stood with the Jewish people and Israel and condemns all forms of anti-Semitism, no matter the source. Note what the statement does not say. It does not name Scheer. It does not condemn Scheer. It does not answer the payment question. It does not address the shared property. It is a general statement of principle offered in place of a specific answer. This is where the story stands as of August 3rd, 2026. The CNN reporting is on the record. Ossoff's demand is on the record. The state party's silence is on the record. Collins' walk-off is on the record. And the specific questions Ossoff put to Collins about payment, about property, and about family remain unanswered. 15 months from now, Georgia voters will decide whether that silence is a survivable position for a Senate candidate.